Do you know that there's two styles or approaches to communication that we primarily use? One of them can draw people to you so that they feel heard and understood and more connected to you. The other tends to push people away, even if it feels like we're using all the right words and saying all the right things. In this episode, we're going to talk all about communications do's and don'ts and how to use the style that will make people want to be close to you, open up to you, trust you, and feel connected to you. Stay tuned. Welcome to the secret formula of femininity for women who want to live a more feminine, fun, and fabulous life. I'm Dr. Nicole Montero, your host on this weekly journey to unlocking your inner radiance, nurturing fulfilling relationships, and becoming the best version of yourself. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Nicole, your guide to tapping into and connecting to your feminine essence. And a big part of femininity and feminine energy is how you communicate. And this is something that is not just for the women, it's for everybody. But I want you to pay particular attention to it as a woman who is on her feminine energy and femininity journey. That's because as women, we are told that we are the master communicators. We know how to use our words. We are articulate. We're looking, usually when women are looking for a relationship, they say what? They want someone who knows how to communicate. Well, ladies, we do know how to communicate at times, but I want us to dig deeper because there are two ways of communicating, two primary styles. And they're used for different things. And I think there's a way that we neglect one of the most powerful ways of communicating. All right. So I'm going to start with a story. And this is a personal one this time. So one time, my husband and I were watching basketball. Actually, it was the finals, the NBA finals. I think it was the Golden State Warriors against the Boston Celtics. So if you watch basketball, you know, right? These two teams go at it. And I think we were on game 4. So we were relaxing. We were hyped into the, game. We both are Golden State Warriors fans, but we were also just relaxing, chilling. The kids were in bed. And my husband was like, babe, I was looking at this property. We talk a lot about investment property and different investments, real estate. And he was like, this one is a little bit different. I'm thinking about if it would be good to buy and hold this one. He was going through all the scenarios. Let's look and see what's going on at the auction. This is an area where it might not be prime right now, but it can build up, right? So we're in a relaxed mood. What do you think? Paint the picture. We're in a relaxed mood, open conversation, discussion. This is a great time to talk about things because we're both relaxed and he's feeling open and, I'm there. So something in me, and this is why I tell you ladies, when you're in your femininity, you have to learn to ground yourself and not get carried away with the anxiety and scarcity thinking. So in my mind, I went into logic mode, which is one of the approaches to communication that a lot of us use. I went into logic mode and I was starting to do what? Ask questions. When we're in logic mode, we are analyzing, we want information. It's like we're information processing, we're like a computer. So I start asking, well, okay, do you know the address? Did you see it? What does the neighborhood look like? Did you see if it's on the auction? Oh my God, is it safe? I don't know. The more I got into logic mode, I started asking a bunch of questions and feeding my own anxiety. And at that point, you can guess what happens. I disconnect from the moment and being present with the original issue because that logic led to a lot of questions, which took me into my own emotional state. And he was like, Nicole, just chill. Like, I'm just talking to you. I don't need that anxious energy. I just need you. He was very clear what he needed. Like, don't bring the anxiety energy. We're just talking. And what he was saying as I analyzed communication more and more was I needed you to be with me. I needed you to match my emotional energy and to be present with me, not to get caught up in your logic and then your own emotional energy. So it was really telling because when I coach women and couples, I try to help them to first understand the power of the emotional mind. We have two minds, the emotional mind and the logical mind. And what happens when you trigger both, and how at the core we are animals. We are emotionally driven animals. So even when we're using logic or we believe we're using logic, there's always an element of tapping into our emotional brain. And if you don't understand that, you are going to think that logic is the end all and be all, and that that's how you're going to convince people, connect to people, you know, open up to your partner. You think that it's about using logic, rationality, and just using a bunch of words. So I just wanted to share that with you because it was a big aha moment for me, myself. And it also captured a lot of what I see with the couples and the women that I coach. And it's really trying to get them to understand the power of understanding their own emotions, but being able to stick with and connect with the person on their emotional level. And this is really huge in relationships because a lot of our conflict, although we might think it has to do with rational things, it's really about our own emotional triggers. And when we're communicating, if we're stuck in a logic mode or trying to be logical, if our partner is in an emotional space, or even if we're in an emotional space and we try to ignore it, then we're going to be missing the mark. So, what is the problem with logic, you might be asked? Like, we were taught, hey, be logical, be rational, stop being overly emotional. You hear these terms a lot. So, what is the problem with logic in emotional moments? Basically, it invalidates. So, when someone is upset, our instinct is to try to solve the problem. That was what was happening when my husband was telling me about the property. I was going into problem solving mode. I was creating a problem and trying to solve it. But emotional moments are not logical, they're about feeling seen and understood. A lot of times, when someone is sharing something with us, they might be being vulnerable. Think about your own ideas. When you open up, I know for me, by the time I share something with someone, it's a little bit difficult. It's easy to stay in your head, it's a little harder to share things with people. So by the time you're vulnerable enough to open up and share with another person, one thing you're looking for is to feel understood, seen, acknowledged. You don't necessarily need people to agree with you, but you don't want to feel dismissed. You want to feel understood, seen, and heard. So when we respond with logical responses in emotional moments, we say things like, well, why are you upset? Or have you thought it through? Or what's the big deal? Or what's your plan for that, right? It can feel dismissive. And even though that's not our intention, we think we're connecting. It can feel to the person like we missed a core part of why they were opening up to us in the first place. Emotional needs require empathy, not analysis. Let me say that again. Emotional needs require empathy, not analysis. So keep that phrase with you. There is power in emotional validation. I have experienced it and I've seen it with couples and with women. When I get them to be able to validate what is going on with their partner, they're like, wait a minute, now he's showering me with everything that I was asking for, listening, understanding, all of that. And it's like, yes, because you were able to emotionally connect and validate, he's able to do the same. We tend to mirror each other, right? I know you may have heard about that. There's even a part of our brain that is primed to tune into and mirror the other person. So when we start to give what we want, the other person is close to us, reciprocates and gives it back to us. Emotional validation is the secret sauce of connection. It's about saying, I hear you. I understand your feelings. I understand that they're important to you. They are valid. Research shows, tons of research shows that when we are emotionally attuned, our communication is stronger because the key to communication or the purpose of communication is to be heard and to hear the other. So when we are emotionally attuned, then our communication is stronger because the other person feels like they are heard and then they're willing to hear us. So it really gets at the core of what communication is about. And that helps our relationships to be stronger. It helps to build trust with each other. Now, these are skills that we use all the time as a trained therapist and as a certified coach. These are skills that we use all the time with clients. But here's the thing, it can be a little bit more difficult to implement those or really apply them in your life. It's easy to step back and be outside of somebody, but when it's your own relationship, your own communication, your own, emotions, then it can be a little bit harder. So it's important to be very conscious of the type of communication that is required in the moment and what you may be doing that's more helpful or more harmful. So if you haven't guessed already, uh, being overly logical when a person is in a state of being in their emotions and needing emotional validation is not a good match. Logic has its place, but I've been reading so many books just about negotiations and how we think and our own biases. And even when we think we're being really logical, we are still driven by emotions. There's the emotional need to be seen, to be validated, to have someone bear witness. There's the emotional need to not feel alone, to feel like we can share and be vulnerable and that we can feel safe. Those are basic needs. So even when we're talking logically or thinking we're being logical, there's still an underlying emotional need that is driving it. So the best thing to do is to learn to also master emotional attunement, not to only think that the logical questions and analysis is good communication, because it's often not, especially in your relationship. I was talking to someone saying that one thing that we tend to have difficulty with, especially as high achieving women, is getting out of our heads. My high achieving woman, my high achieving Black woman, woman of color, you know what I'm talking about. You were taught how to follow the rules, how to read people, but how to respond in a logical way, not to be overly emotional. You were given all of these messages, and the result is sometimes you are cut off from the power of emotional connection and emotional attunement. You feel like it's weak. Just because we are saying we are driven by emotions, we need to tune into emotions, it doesn't mean that you're a hot mess or you're out of control, right? I think the image of being overly emotional is that you're not regulating your emotions. Attuning to your emotions is understanding them, understanding the power of the other person's emotions and regulating. And really, when you're in a relationship, it's what we call co regulating. The more it's that mirroring that I talked about. When you can be in a calmer state, then your partner feels more comfortable and they start to feel safer within themselves and within their bodies. And then they can be in a calmer state. And then what does that do? That helps you to let down your guard to be in a calmer state. So we're talking about not being emotionally dysregulated, but being attuned and handling emotions with grace. That's the femininity part, ladies. Okay. So I want to share with you 5 strategies to help you be in that emotional communication, but to do it with grace. One is, I like to talk about the power of the pause. So it's really pausing and acknowledging. I tell my students all of the time, you have to be careful sometimes when we are writing emails and messages and text messages to people, we are really emotional. And I would say if you feel some kind of strong emotion in your body and your mind when you are messaging, writing something to someone, pause before you send it. That's the golden rule, because your fingers can be typing and you hit send and it's hard to unsend that. And it's hard to backtrack that. So, one of the things you can do is pause and acknowledge. Pause is really important. Pause and acknowledge your own feelings, but also your own emotional state before you respond, and try to pause and tune into the emotional state of the person. So in your relationship, if it's a tense conversation, if it's one of those things where like you guys don't see eye to eye, or if there's something on your mind that you're trying to share and be more vulnerable with, you want to tune in and pause, acknowledge your own emotional state, but also try to understand your partner's emotional state. And that requires just being present. That is really what it requires. Secondly, you want to reflect feelings. So if your partner is in an emotional state, again, avoid, well, why do you feel like that? That's not a big deal. Oh, you'll get over it. Oh my God. Because that's driven by your emotions. You're feeling uncomfortable. So you're trying to fix it. Try to say something like, it sounds like you're feeling blank. It sounds like this is upsetting to you. It sounds like you're confused about that person's reaction and why they did that to you. It sounds like you're a little bit afraid. It sounds like you're angry. Whatever it is that you are tuning into or attuned to, just simply reflect it back. And think about yourself. If you've ever been upset, what has helped you the most? I could tell you, I'll answer it, right? For me, it's when someone says, gosh, I can imagine how that must have made you feel. Or how did you feel about that? Or wow, that sounds upsetting, right? Versus, wait, now what happened? Okay, you need to tell those people not to do that, and you need to do this and you need to do that. One is going into the logical problem solving, fixing mode, and the other is really being present with that person. Okay? That is a powerful emotional emotionally attuned communication tool. The other thing is to stay present. This is throughout. Focus on listening and not explaining. This is one of the biggest things that I work with my kids on, because they're at an age, kids don't want to be, they feel defensive. They don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to disappoint you, all of these things. And what you have to work with them on is like, when you're being given feedback, you need to listen. Okay. It's not a time to over explain, to be defensive, to say it's not your fault, all of these things, because that breaks the communication. And so it's the same in your relationship. When you are present, you're able to really, really, really listen. I mean, really, really. I'm saying it so you can understand the emphasis. I was reading a book about negotiations. It was this former FBI agent, and he talked about hostage negotiations and how you can apply that to business and so many other areas. And he said one of the things that good negotiators do is they listen. They don't jump to conclusions, and that ties into the tip number 4, which is ask open-ended questions. They listen very with intensity and intention, and they're open to being proven wrong. Like, so they try not to jump to conclusions, and if they have jumped to a conclusion or drawn a conclusion, they're open to being proven wrong by the other person talking more, sharing more, communicating more, right? So it's the presence, and it's also the curiosity. When you're asking open-ended questions, it's like, I'm curious. I'd like to know more. Okay, well, tell me about that feeling. Not, are you mad? Are you upset? Right? Those are close-ended yes or no questions. And those shut down the person. In order to just know how to apply this in your relationship, think about yourself. What are the times where you were going through something difficult, you were feeling vulnerable, or you wanted to open up, or you weren't sure? What are the things that helped you to feel safer and more connected to open up, share, and have a difficult conversation? Was it somebody asking you a bunch of questions, yes or no, and seeming like they already knew your situation? Or was it the person who could sit with you, be present, and curious and ask open ended questions? I'm sure it's the latter, right? And ladies, let's take a pause and let's put it into dating terms. I have coached so many women who are anxious to get all of these answers from a man that is courting them. They want to know, where's this going, or how do you feel about me, or what do you want? And they ask so many direct questions. What they're doing is they're bypassing the emotional brain. Everybody has an emotional brain. They're bypassing the emotional communication, and what that's doing is that's shutting down the deeper com- uh, and what that's doing is that is shutting down the deeper levels of connection for that man. And it's also shutting down their curiosity. It's very like, yes, no, it's just very kind of surface level. So they'll give you answers, but it may not be the deeper answers that you really want to know, the true answers. You have to learn to balance having boundaries with letting it flow. Letting it flow is asking open ended questions, it's reflecting on feelings or observations. It is learning to withstand your own anxiety and not have to blurt out all of these analytical, logical things all at once that shuts the other person down. All right, you get me with that, right? It's flow over logic. And the fifth step is match energy. I always tell you time, space, and tone. Tone of voice says so much. Use a tone that communicates empathy, understanding. I care about you. I want to know more. I'm there with you, right? That's matching energy. It's not quickly moving on to the next question that you may have. All right. So these five things: you pause and acknowledge, reflect feelings, yours and the other person's, stay present, focus on listening and not explaining, ask open ended questions, which is being curious, and then finally match energy. And these are all simple things. Really, the commonality in all of this is regulating your own emotions. That's because in order to stay present, to be curious, to acknowledge feelings, reflect feelings, you have to regulate your own emotions. And a lot of times with us women, we're driven by an underlying anxiety. We're anxious about losing something, or being shut out, or not saying the right thing, or abandonment, or all of our past triggers come up to cause us anxiety and take us out of the moment. So for example, if your partner is frustrated after a long day, instead of saying, "Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you tell your boss?" or "Why didn't you, do X, Y, and Z?" It's better to make it simple. It sounds like today was really overwhelming. Do you want to talk about it? It sounds like today was tough. I'm here to listen, right? Very simple. You don't need to know the whole story right now. It will unfold. And if you notice, if you really pay attention to masculine and feminine communication, as a woman, the more you are able to like curb that urge to get all the answers right now, you'll find that men usually are ready to open up as long as the atmosphere is relaxed, it's not pressured, and they feel like you can listen. All right, so what are some common pitfalls of the communication, trying to understand emotional and logical communication? The biggest pitfall is falling into this desire to fix the problem. And it's normal. We are problem solvers, ladies. We are doers in a lot of ways. We are so empathetic that we want to fix the problem. The other thing is sometimes we feel uncomfortable with intense emotions. So we want to hurry up and cover it up. It's like when a child is crying, it's like, well, what are you crying about? We want them to tidy it up. So we're uncomfortable with other people's intense emotions. And usually that means we're uncomfortable with our own, especially if it's what we label as negative emotions, which there's no good or bad emotions. They are just emotions. So if it's anger, if it's sadness, if it's rage, if it's fear, we tend to feel uncomfortable. So we don't want to see it in anybody else, and we darn sure don't want it triggered in us. But you have to remember that emotions aren't problems to solve. They just are. They're just experiences. They're just things that we want to honor in ourselves and in the other person. So if you are able to recognize that pitfall and you can say, all right, this is a minefield. I'm not going to try to fix the problem and I'm not going to try to dampen emotions. We don't have to put out emotions or smother them. We just have to learn how to regulate them. And just by regulating your own emotions and allowing them to be present in your conversations, you are going to see a shift in your relationships, a real shift. You are going to experience a closeness. Now, lean in, ladies, listen up. If you're in a relationship and you find that you and your partner are constantly bickering, you feel you're right, he feels he's right. It's almost like a hostage negotiation situation. And what kind of tactics do really, really good negotiators use? They listen and they try their best to understand the viewpoint of the person they're negotiating with. So, whether it's the hostage taker or if it's some big diplomatic negotiations, they try their best to get into the head and understand, truly understand the perspective of the person that they're negotiating with. Well, you want to do that in your relationship. Instead of being like, well, I can't believe he did that. I'm sick of it. And side note, a lot of this conversation on social media, the gender wars, bashing men, bashing women, it's not helping at all because it's making us stick to our positions and, just get so solidified in what we believe that we're not even curious about what the person we're in a relationship is feeling in their view, in their perspective. So simply being curious and listening and trying your best to truly, truly listen. When I think about the situations where my husband and I had the most disagreement, that tension, there's a lot of things that break the tension. One of them is physical intimacy, right? Sexual intimacy is really important. That's another episode. But when it comes to communication, it's talking less, zip the lips, listening more, and having a posture of being curious and not acting like, I don't care if you've been together 15, 20, 30 years. Stop acting like you know everything about how that person is going to respond. I hear it all the time from some of the women that I coach. I already know. I know that's not going to work, Dr. Nicole. I already know what he's going to say. So that's when we come back and we really focus on her, or we focus on you. We focus on you as the woman and how can you be more open to listening and trying to understand. It doesn't mean you're going to agree and say that your partner is right, but it means you really want to understand what's driving them, what's motivating them, what are their needs, what are their wants, what are their non negotiables. We know a lot about our own non negotiables, our own boundaries, what lines you can't cross with us. But how curious are we? How curious are you about those same things for your partner, the person you're in relationship with? And if you're not yet in a relationship, but you are seeking a relationship, because, most of my audience, that's what they want. They understand the power of being in connection with another person. Well, it's going to take a whole lot of curiosity, a whole lot of emotional regulation, and practicing these practical skills so that you can listen more and learn that you might have a lot to say, but communication is not always about the words. It's the body language, it's the nonverbals, it's being present, and it's the desire, it's really the desire to understand the other person. So that was the question. It was like somebody just asked me, how do I do all this? It's like a big minefield. So I'm going to challenge you between now and the next episode. I'm going to challenge you to commit to making some shifts. Really practice emotional validation. When you feel yourself having the urge to ask a bunch of logical questions, try to challenge yourself to ask an emotionally validating question or to make an emotionally validating statement. I'm going to challenge you to do that. Reflect on how it changes the dynamic. Do that. It doesn't matter if you think you're trying to help someone. If they don't feel helped, then that's the measure right there if of whether you're really helpful. So I want to challenge you to tap into emotional validation, especially when you feel like the urge to do the logical questioning, and take note of how this really changes the dynamic. Usually it's a whole 180. All right. If you want to dive deeper into fulfilling relationships, healthy communication, what that means for you and your feminine energy as a woman, then you want to join the Boundaries to Bliss Inner Circle. That is my Inner Circle group coaching membership for women who are on the path, not just to healthy boundaries, but to femininity, and healthy, fulfilling relationships. The notes the link is in the show notes. You can find out more about it. You can also find my book, The Boundaries to Bliss Blueprint, which is a good starter for all of these different levels of communication and how to apply all of the self love that you're learning. You don't want to just have self love just to love yourself. Self love helps your relationship, and you can learn how to use your self love with your healthy communication to have a bomb, supercharged, amazing, intimate relationship. Okay, so can you take up that challenge? Together, we can transform the way you connect to the people that you love, especially your partner. Until next time, stay soft, stay attuned, and stay beautifully you. I'm Dr. Nicole.